Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for our digital Q&A session. So today we've got the co-founders of SpaceBase, Eric Dahlstrom and Emeline Paat Dahlstrom. So before we begin today, though, I'd just like to acknowledge that we're speaking here to you today I'm here today from the traditional land of Ghana people, and I recognize their connection with the land, waters, and skies, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. And I also extend those respects to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here today, and also the people whose lands you might be visiting on as well. So my name is Akshay. I am a space communicator here at the Australian Space Discovery Centre. And I'm in Adelaide with you today. So if you have any questions during our chat, please submit them through the Q&A, and then we can pass them along to our guests. So I'll just hand over to our guests here today to introduce themselves.
Yeah, well, again, thank you so much. Kia ora, and greetings from Auckland, New Zealand, where we're presently based. And so we'll give a little bit of a background about ourselves. So I guess we can start this first slide. So I just wanted to say that, yeah, from where I come from, so I'm originally from the Philippines. I immigrated to the US about 25 years ago, and I'm currently living in New Zealand. I was born in the Philippines during the Apollo era, so I'm pretty old. And I also grew up to like Star Wars and Star Trek, which is why I'm really gung-ho with space. But I was basically living in the Philippines, where at that point, there was no opportunity to really be part of the space industry. But of course, times have changed. And my background, basically, I did an undergrad in physics, and then I also did a master's in Earth and Space Science. But I think my golden ticket next is when I got a scholarship to the International Space University. Is also the same place that Eric and I met. This was back in 1989. Most people probably haven't been born yet. So I did a program. Then it basically opened up my career. And so I guess I can talk about my career in three buckets. So one is that I've worked a lot in space education and management, where I also worked for ISU in the beginning years, helped really develop the master's program, and they'll also run the space studies program that goes around the world in different places. I'm also very much involved with a lot of associations kind of like around the world, from Moon Village Association to also I worked for Singularity University, which also birthed a couple of like space startups today. And then next. So the second part of, I guess, what I think about my career is that I love to work with startups. So I've worked for about a decade in Space Adventures, part of the kind of like the founding team, where 20 years ago is when we've kind of like first coined the phrase space tourism, where the first, private citizen was actually went to space, to the International Space Station through the Russians. And then the other startups that I've worked on are those that have basically competed with the Google Lunar X Prize, which of course was not won, but then some of them have transferred over to the NASA CLIPS program, which is now working for Artemis today. And then the last part, if you can click, is I guess what I call the democratization of space. So having the background of having lived in a developing world, and then also working in Silicon Valley with all of like this technology and space startups, I just basically thought that there is a growing gap between the spacefaring nations of today and also the rest of the world. And if we don't really do anything about it, that people will basically get left behind. And that became my purpose and my mission. And so about 6 years ago, we left Silicon Valley. We came to New Zealand to basically start SpaceBase. SpaceBase is a social enterprise and a consultancy where what we're trying to do is really to shrink that gap. And we do that by really helping catalyze space ecosystems, primarily in developing and emerging countries. So if we can actually do it here in New Zealand, we want to share that to the rest of the world. And that's sort of like what we've been doing over the past 5 years, with different things from educational programs to entrepreneurship and innovative types of projects like the Space Challenge, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then we also do advisement to local and national government and do like technical due diligence for VCs that are actually funding space startups. It's next for Eric.
It's my turn. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so this has a complicated slide with all sorts of aspects of my background, and I'll talk about some of this, and I hope to stimulate some questions about different parts of this. I started, I'm from the US. I started studying physics. I was interested in black hole physics and gravity theory. And then I went to University of Maryland, where I studied astronomy, mainly radio astronomy and infrared. There's one of the picture of the radio telescope I used, and also the infrared astronomy satellite map of the galaxy with the satellite below it. And I was also worked for NASA for a bit at NASA Goddard on the Cosmic Background Explorer satellite. But then I shifted into space engineering. I worked as a contractor for NASA on the design of the space station, and I had a great role there where I was in the review team of the design, so that I had an open charter to look at any aspect of the design of the space station, from module arrangement, communications, power, thermal, connections with the Russians, where I was point of contact for the Russian information for a long time, and so we've always been interested in the international aspects of space. And so, the Europeans, Japanese, Canadians, Russians, all working together on this design of the space station. I also took a time back looking. I was working for NASA headquarters on the assessment of the Space Shuttle Challenger accident way back in 1986, and also lessons learned from the accident, and risk assessment of how to counting all the ways you can actually blow up a space shuttle. 2,807, it turns out, and so I was working on these on the big companies as contractors, Lockheed and Raytheon, and some others, Planning Research Corporation, at different NASA centers, and working also on some of the moon return to the moon plans at that time. But I was getting more involved with International Space University. With Emeline, we met in France. We worked together in Spain, fell in love in Sweden, and got married in Austria during the ISU program. So it's we're the only couple to ever get married during the ISU program. So I was I was teaching at ISU in a number of different countries, and both Emeline and I were in Adelaide in January and February, teaching at the Southern Hemisphere Space Studies program. But then in California, we were getting more involved with space startup companies, and so that's where I was working on as a program manager for the lunar lander design, and for commercial lunar landers, and then also helping other companies get started, and also working with the NASA Frontier Development Lab on applying machine learning to space problems. And so I was working on the team that was looking at how to deflect asteroids that are dangerous to the Earth. And so I'm a big fan of the moon and asteroids and the potential for humanity moving out into the solar system, as well as using space for addressing problems on Earth. And so that's why when we saw all the potential of these programs and how the barriers were coming down in Silicon Valley and our friends were creating space startups in the garage, we wanted to make sure that the whole world was involved in this. And that was the motivation for SpaceBase, and to take this message around the world. And so that's what got us to move to New Zealand and working with other countries like in the Asia Pacific region, for example. So maybe
if we can advance to the last slide. I mentioned earlier that with SpaceBase, we do a lot of things. I mean, I think we've tried like 20 different methodologies of how you kind of like catalyze a space ecosystem. But one of them is basically running space competitions. So we've been running space competitions since 2018, but to this year, we have the Space for Planet Earth Challenge, which is the second time that we've run this in the Pacific region. So it includes New Zealand, Australia, the Philippines, and also the Pacific Islands. And it has like two categories, one for secondary and then the other for university and startups. The main focus of the problem area this time around is methane emissions and basically looking at target areas for methane emissions to leverage satellite data and address climate change. So we're running this. We're in the first phase of basically trying to get applicants for the incubator program, or there's an online incubator program that happens between October to around February, and so we're down selecting to those teams, and the proposal timeframe basically ends at the end of August. So we would love to have more Australians participate in the program, and the applications are free, and the prizes are between 25,000 New Zealand dollars for the university and startup grand prize winners, and then 8,000 for the grand prize for the secondary. And for more information, just go to spacebase.co/challenges, or send us an email, info@spacebase.co, and then you can also use the QR code there for more info. I think we will end there and look forward to questions.
While we're waiting for some questions, I did have a couple. That was really interesting. Thank you for sharing, first of all. Emeline, I was just wondering if you mentioned a really interesting point about how your passion for trying to get developing nations involved in the space industry, because obviously it's a very like capital and financial and sort of intensive sort of industry. So I was just wondering if you could go over a little bit more about how, what kind of challenges you faced, anything that's particularly different, working in developing nations as opposed to more established areas such as, America.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And as you alluded to it, of course, the difference is capital and funding, right? Because there's a lot less funding at least in the developing world. But also, I do want to point out, which is kind of like what Eric was also saying, the past 10, 15 years, there's really a change in terms of access to technology. So in the past, just like one example, and upstream, which is more on manufacturing is of course still capital intensive, and so that's kind of like harder to do. But downstream side, where in terms of data analysis and remote sensing, today you've got data that is open source, which again 10 years ago that was not the case, where they would have to pay for data. But then NASA and ESA are now giving away data for free. The other part to that is on the data analysis side. Also, in the past, the platforms that are analyzing this data are also expensive, right? But again, now there's open source platforms like QGIS and others, where so now if you have free data and free analysis software, the power of your computer or your laptop today is a lot more powerful than 10, 20 years ago. Our cell phones are like millions of times much faster than the guidance computers that basically brought humans to the moon. So there's a big difference now, which is why we say that there's a democratization of the technology and the democratization of these opportunities to the countries that are now also very interested in being part of the space industry. So I think that's one part of it, and then. The way that we kind of like started out in New Zealand as well is we intentionally did it more like from a grassroots approach, where there's a lot of things that you can actually do with very little resources. And so even just like starting meetups to everything now, especially with COVID, with everything being done, there's a lot online, just like this particular session, where you don't need a lot of capital to actually influence and do outreach to the people that you want to influence. And so that's certainly another way of trying to get those other places where there's not much resources to participate.
So we have a question from Charlotte. She says, your job sounds so exciting. What's been the coolest startup that you guys have supported?
That's actually pretty, that's a good question. So I'll go first. Okay. I think the startup, well, for one, I mentioned I worked for Space Adventures for quite a long period of time. It was like interesting that it was ahead of its time. Basically, this is this scrappy startup that thought they can actually sell like the third seat on a Soyuz. At that time, where only career astronauts or career cosmonauts can actually go to space. And so the fact that that even happened 20 years ago, and doing that with the Russians, with a bunch of really, really young entrepreneurs. I was at Baikonur when we launched Dennis Tito on a Soyuz rocket, and just to me that's still the most surreal experience that I ever participated in, where all of these like traditional infrastructure and people, but having like this one small company that says that they can actually do it, manage to be able to do that, and for me, I think that's the opening really of private human spaceflight, because it just shows that it's not just governments who can actually do it. There is the potential for commercial companies to do it. So I think that to me that's the plus, also the fact that I can that I also had the perks of doing zero-G flights and going to Star City and Moscow because I was on staff.
One that I like is I've been involved with 3 different companies that have that are building lunar landers and with the idea of delivering payloads to the moon, both for NASA and for private companies, and that it's just impressive to see the transformation and the opening up of potential economic activity going to the moon, and that all these different groups, they're all there's so many different groups around the world now that are actually developing lunar landers and are getting ready for activities on the moon. And so I think I think things are going to take off really fast. I think all of us are going to see a remarkable level of activity on the moon. And I like your background of showing a future of what you might see if looking out a window on the moon. So because there's India just some last week launched a mission. Russia's getting one on the launch pad. You have 3 or 4 companies that are in the U.S. that are building things, and it's just things are about to take off in a big way, and so I think people that are interested in space should be aware about what's about to happen.
Yeah, I think we can all sort of share that excitement, right? Space is something that, no matter what your age, it kind of just brings you back to, watching something really cool as a kid. You're like, oh, this is awesome. And it's really, really cool to see that from sort of just everybody, no matter, you've obviously got a lot of experience and you're still, excited about all the things and the potential for new space things, which is just really cool. We have a few more questions. So from Jason, from an international perspective, where do you think Australia has the most potential in the global space industry?
Yeah. Australia has a huge amount of capability and a long history in space. That has been, the first ground stations for the Mercury program were for NASA were set up there, and it's it's famously where the images of the walking on the moon with Apollo 11 was so there's this tremendous industrial capability, and there's and I know that you're getting ready with all these different launch sites and rocket companies and about to do that, but I think all the innovation in the satellite world and the components of the satellites, and as well as really interesting lessons and experience from the remote operations of the mining activity and things like that, all that applies directly to operating in space. And so I think, I'm just amazed at how much potential there is in all these areas, and I think there's a lot of support not only from the government but also from incubators and industry associations. So I'm really encouraged by what the potential, what is going to come out from Australia. It really is. What you need to do is you need to find ideas of unique ways to contribute, and you're sort of surrounded by an environment of support. And so there's people that will be the founders, but there's also, if you learn about companies that are starting, you can join them. Yeah, Emeline was famously always the third employee or something like that. She was able to help any startup get going, and so there's a role for that too.
And maybe just to add to what Eric was saying, I think to be able to kind of like look at your strengths or Australia's strengths in already terrestrial established industries, which is what like he was talking about in terms of like either mining or remote robotics, which already exists. So therefore, if that's already a strength, you can just kind of like take that to another level of applying it to extreme environments, of which space is, right? So I think that might be one thing to look at. Yeah, the niche markets that Australia is already good at, and then also the defensible ones where, for example, ground stations, which are always needed, kind of like way more towards the pole. And Australia and New Zealand are both countries that have actually that luxury of being able to play in that particular market.
Yeah, and we always think in terms of, there's the moving out into the solar system through the moon and asteroids and things like that, and then there's also focus back on Earth, and Australia is already demonstrating a lot of sophisticated applications of things like not only remote sensing but also Internet of Things. With the fleet space, for example, picking up the transmissions from these little transmitters scattered across the Australia, and so it's like because you're addressing those problems that satisfy needs in Australia, that also applies around the world as instantly to be a global market on that.
So a few more questions. So a couple about your incubator program. So first one is, have you run this program previously? If yes, what has been the solution? And then also, what's some advice for somebody who wants to participate in your challenge, yet doesn't have a strong technical background? Is that a limiting factor, or is it maybe a strength?
Yeah, great. Yeah. So the incubator program is always part of the space challenge. And so we've run two before, previously. And what we do during the incubator is basically to get the teams that have proposed solutions to the challenge, to get them to a stage where by the end of that incubator, they're actually submitting the full final application of their solutions. So what you do during the incubator period, and also it depends on the challenge. So for example, last year it was coral health and carbon sequestration. So that's the focus. Then a year before that, it was detecting monitoring pollution. And so when we do the incubator, there's three aspects to it. One is like you learn more about the problem area. So we would basically invite specialists on the problem. Then the other part is that we help the teams also get more exposed to the tools and the potential solutions. So like for example, as part of the incubator, we had a workshop on QGIS, because that's like one of the things that kind of like you need for data analysis. And then the third part of this is that just like any incubator, we also do sessions like design thinking, product market fit, to all the way to how do you pitch your solution for the finals of the challenge. So that's sort of like what we do in the incubator. And then the second question was, what is it? Oh, that if you're not technically savvy. So I guess one suggestion that I would say is that because it's a team, right, that actually apply for the challenge, look for team members that will basically make up your team that has like the strengths that's needed for going through the finish line. So yeah, for sure, if you have a team, you need the technologists or the ones that are actually working on on the tech itself, but at the same time, it's a project, right? So if you're great at project management, then maybe you're the project manager, and you can still be involved in the actual in the actual team. So do you have any other?
Yeah, and basically, we have on the website we have some sources of information about, like, we'll work to make available some of the free data sets about that are monitoring methane right now. But what we're looking for is, I guess, a motivation from the team, and also some awareness of what the problem entails, and whether or not you have an approach of mixing different kinds of data, looking at how things change over time, how looking for we're working to provide a working better working environment for, and make it easier to look at this data and compare it. And also we're meeting with the methane sat team that is flying their instruments on an aircraft and collecting sample data, and they're going to make that data available to us and to share to the teams. And so we're sort of like creating, giving you access to some of the components of this information, and what we're interested in is for you to have some idea about what direction you want to look at. I mean, you can change your mind if you're in the incubator, and you can change your mind to as to your approach. But it's we just like you to show that you are appreciating the problem in some way, and submitting a simple proposal of how you'd get started.
All right, so we have a question from Eliza. They really want to be a founder of a cool, innovative space company, but after their degree, not really sure how to go about it. So what would be, you guys have some great experience, throughout your careers, working for some amazing companies, now co-founders of your own company. So what are some of the advice you would have that helped you grow in your career?
Yeah, I think one thing that is a common denominator is actually find good mentors. So mentors where those mentors would have gone through probably like either the same career path that you want to go through, and they're just a little further along, or they're actually founders already of companies that are either already in a different stage or are successful. Because I think you can't trade experience. So I guess the second thing to note is that if you can actually intern in any either companies that are also working around the same kind of like lines to get more experience, that's also a great way to like increase kind of like your knowledge, not just theoretically, but more kind of like in a hands-on way. And then I had one more thought, but it escaped me. So go. I'll remember.
Okay. Just approaching with the idea of what is missing in the tech world. It's interesting to look around and look at what people are encountering as problems, and can you find some way to solve these things? And it's interesting how many times if you run into some experts, they will say something is impossible, and then people go out and demonstrate it. It's like for years I thought that it would just be impossible to have a satellite talk directly to a cell phone, but now several companies are about to demonstrate that. And so but you can there are certain things in Earth orbit that are needed, and there's also, for example, there's a big need for better dedicated telescopes in geosynchronous orbit. Right now, like we ran a machine learning program on detecting bushfires in Australia with the weather satellites. And the weather satellites, they're great for getting an image every 10 minutes, but they're not designed to detect fires really. And so I think there's an opportunity for dedicated telescopes in geo, and there's now starting to be small geo satellites that are 1/10 the size of the other ones. But it's for all these different, there's a lot of high value applications in Earth orbit, in communications or remote sensing or things like that. But there's also a big open area is all this activity that might happen on the moon. And so there's, you'd be amazed at how much NASA doesn't know about long-term lunar bases. That every once in a while they will show they're so embarrassed and they'll show a little slide to say, these are the 50 things we don't know how to do, and a lot of them are about life support and food and pharmaceuticals and mining activities and all these things that are, and so once again, it's everything out the window in your background is nobody knows how to do these things. So if you're interested in taking a long-term vision, you could focus on something that these that people on a lunar base are going to need, and try to address that, and maybe you'll be just at the right time for when it's needed.
So yeah, basically, just in other words, either LEO or cislunar or even terrestrial. The point is focus on the problem. Focus on the problem that's missing, and that's where you, especially I think. Both for Australia and New Zealand, because we're so, just in terms of numbers of people, we're small, right? And so I think one thing that I always say is think about global from day one. Where your market is the world, because it's not gonna in Australia and New Zealand alone, the market is going to be small because of just the size of where we are. So you always have to think about the problem that is definitely working for kind of like globally. And my last thing that I forgot about earlier, though, also I think it's worth, if you're trying to create a company, it's definitely worth going to either an incubator or a pre-incubator. It doesn't necessarily have to be a space one, because I think most of us, like coming from like technology, space, science backgrounds, we lack the business acumen that's normally needed to create either a startup or a company. And so I certainly really recommend to kind of like go through some kind of a program that will add that to your repertoire.
Thank you so much. So unfortunately, we've only got time for one more question. So I think we'll go with Edward. So he's saying hi from New Zealand. He was just wondering what opportunities there are for a high school student wanting to get into the space industry. Anything you're aware of, or is it something that we might have to wait till university or beyond? Is there anything they can get involved with at a high school level? Well,
for one, the Space Challenge also has a high school level. So I would definitely encourage you to create a team and participate. And then the other thing is that, there are, you'd have to look for it, but there are potentials for like, what am I saying? The internships on a high school kind of like level that they may not be advertised like officially, but if you're diligent enough to kind of like look at the companies that are existing in New Zealand, and maybe during a summer break, just either volunteer or get that experience. So that once you get to your university level or even when you're trying to like look for jobs, that experience level is valued very much by any startups. So I think that's another way to look at it. And in terms of networking as well, there are associations that are happening all over the country now that have mentorship programs. So like also and for women, for example, the Women in Space Aotearoa has a mentorship program for high schools.
Yeah, and there are a few other little programs that are starting, but I'm not sure if they're ready in time for you. It's there's rocket clubs and there's some programs, on-site programs, and at the Antarctic Research Center in Christchurch and things like that. But we're just trying to encourage more of these programs for high school level.
All right, and if you're very entrepreneurial, you can actually start one yourself.
Yeah, that would be amazing, right? That'd be a fantastic story, starting a company from high school. But yeah, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come speak to us and everybody that's in the call right now. So yeah, thank you so much. Eric and Emeline, it's been fantastic. Your answers have been really, really insightful. It seemed like there's a lot of interest for that incubator program in the chat, a lot of questions about it. So hopefully you'll be receiving some Australian entrants or New Zealand or wherever our audience is joining us from. So it's been absolutely fantastic and a pleasure to have you guys on here. And if you would like to learn more about space in Australia, or how to become, a space expert or pursue a career in space, I really encourage you to come visit us at the Australian Space Discovery Centre in Adelaide, because it's a lot of fun. But yeah, thank you again.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this was fun. We're honored to be invited.
Thank you.